So good evening once again. I'm advised by the town clerk that we do have a quorum, so I'm going to formally declare the meeting present and a quorum present. A couple of very quick announcements before we get started. We do have the AutoCAT this evening for anybody who wants to keep an eye on that, needs to. Please come up in the front and you can read it. In order to participate in the meeting tonight, you have to have registered and have to have one of these. So anybody sitting out here, hopefully you have a voting card, because this is what you need to participate in the meeting. There is a non-voting section immediately to my right, the bleachers, and anyone who doesn't have a card should move to that section now. And anyone in the bleachers that has a card, move on to the floor if you do. Just a reminder, we have our own rules of procedure in Harwich. The selectmen have placed them, as is their custom, in the warrant book for you on the first couple of pages, including the motion chart. Lists all motions that are in order at a Harwich town meeting. If our rules and our chart don't give us the answer to the question that's raised, we also use as a resource town meeting time the handbook of the Massachusetts Moderators Association. If you want to make a motion other than a procedural motion, for example, to move the question, it's got to be in writing. So if you're planning on making a motion on an article and you haven't written it, please put it together. We need it for the record. I have to make sure the town clerk has all of the motions, and that's an important part of it. So any motion in writing. If you're recognized, please use one of the three microphones, or you're welcome to come up here to speak if you'd like. If I'm unable to recognize you by name, please introduce yourself before you start speaking. The process on each article is that I will read the article, and then I will recognize the chair of the Finance Committee. Under our rules, the Finance Committee makes the motion on each article, provided that the Finance Committee has a positive recommendation. If the Finance Committee does not have a positive recommendation, then I will go to the floor and seek a positive motion. In the event that nobody wants to make a positive motion, our rules provide that the Finance Committee then will make the affirmative main motion of indefinite postponement. And we repeat that process for each article. We have a short warrant tonight, but we have some important subjects. And I'm not sure why you're here. Hopefully you're here for all 8 articles. But I will tell you that once we get through the first couple of articles, it's in everybody's interest that you stay. And the reason I say that is that, 1, we can finish the warrant, and then 2, Articles 7 and 8 have potential tax relief for all of us, the lowering of assessments at both the regional school and the Cape Cod Regional and the Monomoy Regional. So they come with financial benefits, so good reason for all of us to stay. So with that, I'll recognize Emily Mitchell, the town clerk, to give us the return of the warrant.
Good evening. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Town of Harwich, special town meeting, October 18th, 2022, 6 p.m. Barnstable. To either of the constables of the Town of Harwich in said county, greetings. In the name of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you are hereby directed to notify and warn the inhabitants of said town qualified to vote in elections and town affairs to meet in the Community Center Gymnasium, 100 Oak Street, in said town, on October 18th, 2022, at 6 p.m., then and there to act on the following articles. Hereof fail not, and make return of this warrant with your doings thereon at the time and place of said voting, given under our hands this 19th day of September 2022. Michael D. McCaskill, Chair. Mary E. Anderson, Vice Chair. Donald Howell, Clerk. Julie E. Kavanaugh. Larry G. Ballantyne. Board of Selectmen, Town of Harwich. And the Constable's return, September 23rd, 2022. By virtue of this warrant, I have this day notified and warned the inhabitants of the Town of Harwich, qualified to vote in elections and town affairs, to meet at the Harwich Community Center, 100 Oak Street, in said town on Tuesday, the 18th of October, 2022, at the time and place for the purpose herein named by posting up attested copies thereon in the 4 post office buildings in Town Hall and the Community Center in the Town of Harwich, which covers all 4 precincts at least 14 days before the time of said meeting as within directed, and causing an attested copy thereof to be published in the Cape Cod Chronicle, published in Barnstable County, and having its circulation in the Town of Harwich. Signed, David Robinson, Constable.
Thank you, Emily. Article 1, acquisition of property interests and appropriation of funds for the Route 28 dry sewer project and Phase 3 wastewater project. See if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by gift, purchase, or eminent domain for public utility purposes, including without limitation, the construction, installation, maintenance, improvement, repair, and replacement of utilities and other related rights, appurtenances, and facilities, and to enable the town to undertake Phase 3, the Town of Harwich Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, approved by the Massachusetts Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs in a Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act certificate dated May 13, 2016, and for any and all purposes incidental or related thereto, the fee or easements in, on, under, or near certain parcels of land located at. And I'm not going to read all of those various addresses. I'll leave that to you to check those. Land formerly owned by, and those private ways known as Brothers Lane, Perry's Lane, Live Oaks Drive, Scribner Terrace, Wilman's Way, Little Lane, McGurty Road, Washburn Way, Bascom Hollow, Caldwin Lane, and Walden Way 2. And further, to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds or borrow a sum of money to fund the cost of said land acquisition costs and all other expenses incidental and related thereto. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move this Article 1 be accepted and adopted, and that the sum of $105,000 be raised and appropriated for the purposes of this article.
Okay, the motion under Article 1 is accept and adopt. The sum is $105,000, and it's proposed to be raised and appropriated. Is there any debate? Looks like you're ready for a vote. Again, the motion is accept and adopt. The sum is $105,000, and it's proposed to be raised and appropriated. The article seeks authorization for, among other things, eminent domain, and therefore requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of the motion as read so signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by saying no. It's a unanimous vote, and I so declare it. Article 2. See if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by gift, purchase, eminent domain, or otherwise a parcel of land consisting of 1.560 acres, more or less, located at 62 Route 28, identified as Assessors Map 10, Parcel G2, for housing, cemetery, and sewer purposes, and including the purpose of conveyance, and to authorize the Board of Selectmen, subject to compliance with General Laws, Chapter 30B, Section 16, to convey a portion of said parcel for the development of workforce or other housing, and to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, or borrow a sum of money for said acquisition, including all costs incidental and related thereto, and to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into all agreements and to take any and all actions as may be necessary or convenient to accomplish the foregoing purposes. And further, to authorize the Board of Selectmen to retain an historic preservation restriction on the facade of the church building located on the parcel, and a housing restriction, and to act fully thereon. Mr. Hughes.
I move that Article 2 be accepted and adopted, and that the sum of $1 be raised and appropriated for the purposes of the article.
Motion on Article 2 is accept and adopt, and the sum is $1, be raised and appropriated for this purpose. Is there any debate? Mrs. Urbano?
Good evening. I would like to amend this article as written. Can I bring you?
If you want to bring it forward, I'll take a look at it.
Yep.
Remember, we don't amend articles, we amend motions, but I'm sure we can work this out. Okay. John? Yeah. She wants to reference the historic preservation restriction to 184, So the motion on the floor was to accept and adopt with no changes in the article and $1. And the proposed motion to amend by Mrs. Urbano is that the perpetual historic preservation restriction be placed on the West Harwich Baptist Church that meets the criteria under General Laws, Chapter 184, Sections 31, 32, and 33. Is that the amendment you wish to make to the motion?
It is, thank you.
Okay, does anyone second it? Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
I don't believe so unless someone has questions. I think it's explanatory. They include in this article Massachusetts general law that's citing how they're going to proceed with the affordable housing. I just want to cite the applicable law for the historic restriction.
Okay, any other debate on the proposal to amend the main motion? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Craig Chadwick, Harwich Center. Full disclosure, I'm a member of the Planning Board, but I'm speaking solely as a Harwich taxpayer at this point. Couple of questions regarding the amendment. Does that include the proper language to indicate that any construction or rehab of this building complies with the DPCP that was put in place 2 or 3 years ago for that section of West Harwich?
All this amendment does is tie the historic preservation restriction to Chapter 184, Sections 31 through 33, which is, as I understand them, govern the form that a historic preservation needs to take in order to be enforceable. I can't comment beyond that in terms of the question that you've asked.
Is there anyone that can answer that question?
Let me check for you.
Thanks.
Anybody want to try and respond to, I see Town Council, Mr. Giorgio rising.
Or as an alternative, should an amendment be made to include specific language referring to the DCPC?
I think I'll let Mr. Giorgio respond to your first question and the second one.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, so the zoning is the zoning is the zoning. That building is subject to all of the special regulations of the zoning bylaw, which established that as a district of critical planning concern. And so anyone who wants to develop that property will have to comply with those special zoning regulations.
And that includes the regulations that fall under the DCPC that was approved a couple
Yes.
years ago. Thank you. I do have another question, Mr. Moderator.
Go ahead, sir.
The language in here, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems a little bit nebulous to me. For instance, it says, or other housing. It's a pretty broad term. And I know that I'm very much in favor of the housing, and I think we're going to need to address it in the future, some kind of density changes and zoning changes. But for now, I just wondered if some of the language should be tightened up to be potentially more restrictive. I'm just concerned what happens. I understand this purchase is now thinking towards the future. Do we know of the interest in the property itself and the suggestion for 12 apartments? Will it accommodate it? Is it structurally sound? Has the building maintenance department looked at it? Are we, the building maintenance department, going to be responsible for maintenance and insurance and all the other things that go with that? We've had a kind of a past history with buildings that are acquired by the town, and then years later we're still trying to decide what to do with them. I just wondered if all of those issues have been, has a report been issued on the structural integrity of the building, for example?
Okay, well, you've asked a lot of questions there.
My apologies.
That's okay. Mr. Howell, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to talk the amendment. That's the main one.
Okay, all right. So Mr. Howell wants to rise in response to the amendment that's on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And through you, Mrs.
Hold on one second. I'll get back to your question when we get back to the debate on the main motion, but we're trying to stick with the amendment for the moment.
My apologies.
Mr. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you to Mrs. Urbano, was the intention of your amendment to cover the entire building, interior and exterior, or just to be the exterior? And if it was, because that's what the DCPC was about, we'd appreciate some verbiage that would say that the Mass statutes as they pertain to the exterior of the building.
Right, so
Mrs. Urbano.
a historic preservation restriction applies to the outside almost always, unless specified for the inside. I didn't do that. The problem with the word facade, which is not often included with the word historic preservation restrictions, is we don't know what that means. What could it be, just the front facade, the back, who knows? So I'm citing this general law for the exterior preservation of the building.
But I didn't hear the word exterior in the amendment.
No, it's a historic preservation restriction, which, by those words, is exterior of the building.
But the amendment does not have exterior, Mr. Howell, and she's explained why.
I and the board would appreciate it having that explicitly if that's your intent. If it's not your intent, that as you might, I will point out to everyone that you just said almost exclusively. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have the possibility of something other than just the exterior.
I'd be happy to add that, but that's not exactly. It's written that way. If you want the interior added to that, that is specifically done with this historic preservation restriction.
Yeah, so the question, as I understand it, Mrs. Urbano, from Mr. Howell is, would you be willing to take an amendment to your amendment, which currently reads that a perpetual historic preservation restriction be placed on the West Harwich Baptist Church that meets the criteria? He's wondering if you would insert on the exterior of the West Harwich Baptist Church.
If that makes, sure. If
I
that
think
makes
that's
you-
his request.
I mean, we're talking the same thing, but if that makes you, yes.
Okay.
I can do that.
All right. And
Thank
so if you'd stay there just for a minute, so would you like to revise your amendment to include the word exterior?
Yes, Mr. Ford, could I revise this and include the word exterior in my original?
Okay.
amendment?
It's your call. You don't have that. I'm just trying to facilitate things rather than have Mr. Howell bring a motion to amend the motion to amend. That's all.
So how will that read?
But I want you to be comfortable. Right now, you gave me a piece of paper that says, amend to read that a perpetual historic preservation restriction be placed on the West Harwich Baptist Church that meets the criteria under General Laws, Chapter 184, Sections 31 through 33. And he's asking that before the phrase West Harwich Baptist Church, you insert the word exterior.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's your decision. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
person who seconded, do they agree with that? Okay, thank you. So we won't have to vote on that. Okay, so any other debate on the motion to amend the main motion? Mrs. Urbano's motion that's on the floor and now applies clearly just to the exterior of the church. Looks like you're ready for a vote on the amendment. So again, the amendment reads that a perpetual historic preservation restriction be placed on the exterior of the West Harwich Baptist Church that meets the criteria under General Laws, Chapter 184, Sections 31, 32, and 33. All those in favor of the amendment as read so signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by saying no. The motion carries, and so the main motion is now amended to include that. We'll go back to the debate on the main motion. The gentleman was over here. You had a couple of questions. I want to just see if I can get those answered, and then we'll move on. I'll get to you next, ma'am. So you had asked a series of questions, whether there was a structural study and the involvement of what the town was going to be and several things like that. Anybody want to respond and give some background as to what has occurred to put this article together? He's looking for what's happened. Mr. Giorgio, are you going to address that? All right. Mr. Giorgio, Town Council.
Mr. Moderator, so if this article is approved tonight, the next thing that will happen is the town will issue a request for proposals and seek proposals from developers who are interested in developing that property. I'm going to use the term workforce housing, although we will define that in the RFP. The town is not going to take possession of that property, and the only way the town would do that is by recording an eminent domain taking. But we will not do that. The town won't do that unless and until we've identified an advantageous proposal whereby the town will convey that property to a developer to develop the housing. So there really is not going to be a point in time where the town will own that property without having a purchase and sale and a land development agreement in place that will address those issues that you have raised.
So, thank you. So if the property is acquired by eminent domain at some point in the future, if I understood your explanation correctly, an agreement will already have taken place between a developer who's proposed to meet all of the requirements that are laid out in the RFP, and everything would go forward from there, because that would already have been decided by the time the town says we're going to take it by eminent domain.
That's correct.
Okay. So there would be no situation where the developer could get in there and say, oh, I didn't realize this, that, or the other thing, and now the town is stuck with a piece of property that it can't sell for whatever dollar figure is reasonable at that time.
Mr. Moderator, so these can be tricky transactions. I mentioned that we would, the town would negotiate and enter into a land development agreement, which would set forth the requirements that the developer would have to meet in order to obtain permitting, to maintain the structure in the interim, and we would look for guarantees that they will proceed with the development of that property, assuming they obtain permits. So there's always an element of risk there if they don't get the permits. But we've done a lot of these kinds of agreements, and we will do our best to make sure that the town is protected in terms of any future liability.
Thank you. So there would be no situation where a developer could back out once the decision has been made.
I think Mr. Giorgio just tried to answer that.
And I'm just trying to clarify that is in fact the case.
He said that these, as I heard him, he said these are tricky transactions.
Right.
There are no 100% guarantees. They do the best they possibly can to put the town in that position.
And one last question, if I may. Is there a timeline associated for when this activity needs to take place? In other words, if it's approved tonight, as I understand, this is the initial transaction, and if we then get to the next step.
Okay.
Is there a timeline between now and then?
Good question. Is there a timeline that's been set up?
No, there's no specific timeline set up. And I also want to point out, as the moderator indicated, one of the things we'll do here is the town will not record the order of taking until all of this has been worked out and the permits have been received. And so that's going to substantially reduce the risk to the town.
Thank you. Apologize for the myriad of questions.
No apologies needed. All good questions. Thank you, sir. This young lady right here.
Good evening, Sharon Foss.
I recognized her, and then I'll get you next. Sorry.
I have a quick question. My question is,
Could you introduce yourself?
hi, Mary McLean. The wording in the paperwork says workforce housing, and then you're mentioning affordable housing. And I guess a two-part question. When you
Yeah,
say,
I haven't mentioned the word affordable housing.
I thought I heard it already. But anyhow, workforce housing,
The article says workforce housing and other housing.
Okay. Right. Okay, so I guess that's what we're, other. Is workforce considering residents that already reside in the area that are in need of housing? Would it be strictly to Cape Cod residents, Harwich area or surrounding, rather than people coming from off Cape and being housed there?
Okay. So the question from this young lady is really, what is workforce housing? And as it's used in the article, what is meant by that?
Mr. Moderator, so as many of us may know, maybe you don't, there is no really legal definition for workforce housing. Typically, the way you define that is by requiring the housing to be available to individuals who meet some percentage of the area median income. And so under, for example, the Community Preservation Act and the Affordable Housing Trust, that's 110%. Workforce housing will be defined in the RFP as something above that. We haven't worked out that detail yet, but that's how you achieve workforce housing. Now, with respect to a local preference for Harwich residents, we have to be careful with the, both the state and federal fair housing laws, but within the context of those laws, the town can adopt a type of local preference that would give certain points to individuals who reside in the town. But can we guarantee that every unit would go to a Harwich resident? We can't guarantee that, but there are ways to write those so that the preference is for Harwich residents. Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
We can't just have a conversation here and back and forth, so.
I'm done.
You're done, okay. Next, I had a young lady over here.
Thank you. Sharon Foster, Belmont Road, West Harwich. There's an awful lot packed in this amendment, this article. One of the things we were just talking about had to do with the exterior and maintaining the historical facade. And there's another piece in here that really concerns me, is to use a portion of the property to install a pump station. So we'll have this historically maintained building next to what I assume would be a brick square structure on that property as well. So it kind of defeats the purpose of maintaining the historic if you're going to have something modern and contemporary right beside it. This is our Welcome to Harwich location. This is the beginning of Captain's Row. To have a big brick building there right as people come in is not exactly a welcoming feeling, as opposed to these beautiful old homes that line 28 as you enter Harwich. So as I said, there's a lot packed into this. We have the housing question, we have the historic question, and now we have a sewer building question. So my question is this sewer pumping station facility going to be required to have the same historic exterior so that it fits in? Otherwise, none of this makes sense from the historic perspective. I just wonder if anyone's thought of that. And the Finance Committee recommends that we don't even vote on this tonight. So what are we, I'm just trying to understand what we're trying to do right now.
So the Finance Committee's recommendation changed. They made a positive motion now. They made that at the beginning of this article. So
Okay, I was just...
that was a prior position of the Finance Committee. I think you can assume by them now making the positive main motion, although Mr. Hughes certainly can speak for the Finance Committee, that they're now supporting the article. Is that correct, Mr. Hughes?
That was our motion when, at the time the warrant was printed, which was a few weeks ago. We did not have sufficient information to even take up the article. We have since been satisfied with our questions. Just from my little knowledge, and I think our water superintendent will speak in a minute, but if you drive around East Harwich and look at the pumping stations that are out there, they really look like kind of tool sheds. They're not brick buildings in Harwich. They're white cedar shingled on the outside. They look fairly attractive. I don't think you'd know they were a building for pumping sewage unless you actually knew it was inside. Having said that, we just took action on Article 1. We approved it, which takes a site across the street from that as a primary position for a pump station. This one, as I understand it, would be a backup only if that one did not get approved in the taking process. So if I understand it correctly, and the water superintendent can speak to this, the parking lot is not the primary, but it's a backup in case something else doesn't work.
Will we have the opportunity to vote on and approve what these buildings look like? Or are we relinquishing that right by voting yes tonight?
Maybe I'll let Mr. Pelletier respond to that, the water and sewer superintendent.
Good evening, thank you. So with regard to the pump station aesthetics, this would be really no different than how I've been treating all the other ones. I really try to work with the direct abutters on what, aesthetics, siding, things would be desired to fit in with the local neighborhood. In the situation of Route 28, we would certainly make this building aesthetically similar to the church or other adjacent structures.
Thank you.
Any further debate on the main motion as amended? Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Ford, Mr. Moderator. Duncan Berry. I'm also chairman of the planning board at the Town of Harwich. I'm speaking tonight as a resident, not as somebody on the board. I would like to just bring the conversation up a level to a higher, kind of more abstract understanding. The choice tonight is to save a building that is a landmark and is an essential kind of piece of the face of Harwich, or to let it go. And what the town is doing is offering us the ability to consolidate a ragtag lot and make it possible for somebody who wants to do the historic work, maintain a magnificent and important building, use it for, retrofit it for the 21st century and keep our village intact. I regret that perhaps the language wasn't, as crisp as we would all have liked, but I have spoken with people on the Board of Selectmen. I have spoken with the administration. I live within a couple hundred feet there. I had 7 generations of my family that attended church, and that's it there. And I have relatives buried next door. It really meets my very high standards of quality in terms of the way the town wants to work with us and what we have for the future. So I would encourage you to go for it. Thank you very much.
Any further debate? Mr. Kukunas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This building's been for sale for quite some time. In truth of disclosure, I actually looked at purchasing it myself. We're being asked tonight to do something, and I just want the taxpayers, my fellow taxpayers and citizens of this town, to understand what's going on. This piece of property has a questionable title. It is not eligible for title insurance. That's why it has been sitting vacant, with many developers having looked at it. Because my first question is, why is the town doing this? I mean, if it's a beautiful building and it's a historic building and there's people interested in buying it, why don't the owners just buy it? Well, the answer to that is there's a title flaw. And that's making it difficult for the owners, or the so-called present owners of larger portions of this, to move forward in selling it on their own. With that in mind, my question through you, Mr. Moderator, to either our Chief Procurement Officer or to the town's attorney: can a town legally put out an RFP for a piece of property which they do not own? Because from what I understand, that is going to be the steps that we are going to follow. We're going to put an RFP out first for a piece of property that we do not own, with the defined historical restrictions, with the defined number of housing units we would like, and the possibility of a piece of the property having an easement for sewer, and even more so to clear the title for the gravesite, because the gravesite is arguably of who owns it. Town maintains it, but there's an ownership portion of it. So can the town legally put an RFP out for a property in which they do not own? That's my first question.
Mr. Giorgio, would you like to respond to Mr. Kunis' question?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, the town can issue an RFP before it takes title to the property.
Excellent. Now, as far as just so I understand, I'm a little taken back by, and I'm going to take this opportunity to call out whoever wrote the explanation in this handbook. Because I'm not an attorney, I'm a simple-minded farmer, but I do understand 30B procurement law. And I'm concerned for myself and my fellow residents in this town that under the explanation, and I read as a quote, and then dispose of this property to a developer who has expressed interest in constructing approximately 14 units of workforce housing within the existing church. That skirts the line, however close, but it skirts the line of 30B procurement laws. We're not doing this for somebody, right? We're going to have a right by the book law 30B procurement process where anyone can come in and bid on this. Am I correct in assuming that?
Mr. Giorgio.
Mr. Moderator, I was the one, I'll confess, who wrote that explanation, and I did so inartfully. But we have told that developer in no uncertain terms that the town must issue an open and fair competitive RFP, and there is absolutely no guarantee that that developer will be the most advantageous proposer.
Okay. One more question, if I may, Mr. Moderator.
You may.
Under the 30B process, procurement process, there will be a dollar figure attached to this. And just for sake of me to understand it and bringing it down into simple terms, developer who wants to move forward offers $300,000 for it. I'm just throwing a figure out so I can ask my question. The town accepts everything else. It's everything in the as advantageous as the attorney has pointed out. So they picked this developer that the $300,000 is now taken in. Is that going to $300,000 go to the town, or is a portion of that $300,000 going to be extrapolated out to what is arguably a shadow owner? There is a church organization that is claiming that they own portions of it, but there are title issues there. And there may be, in fact, next year, another group that might come forward and say they were the original 1600s Baptist church that was there, and they're obligated to it. How is the distribution of funds going to happen once the RFP has been issued and a developer has been picked and the town is now getting ready to transfer the title? Does the town receive all that money, or are we actually going to be paying that back to the proposed owners?
Mr. Giorgio, that hypothetical from Mr. Kunis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. With that hypothetical question, I don't think that's the intent at all. I think it's important to realize that this project, if you will, is going forward not necessarily for the town to get a lot of money out of this, but what we will be getting out of this are enforceable restrictions, 14 units of workforce housing, and that property will then be back on the tax rolls. So there's a substantial benefit to the town financially going forward. But many times in these kinds of transactions, the towns are willing to sell property for nominal consideration in return as an incentive for the developer to construct housing and to put properties back on the tax roll. That all will be determined by the select board when they authorize the issuance of the RFP.
Mr. Kunis, does that answer your question?
It does, but then it raises another one, if I may, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah, you're up to about 8 minutes, so you got 2 more.
Well, I'll make it good. I'll make it worth it. There are a lot of properties in which people here in town own that have title issues. We're getting down now where most of the developable land has been sold, and all that's left is a lot of these parcels that have questionable issues. I'm just concerned that there's no dollar value in here, and the town hasn't come up with some kind of assessed value so that it is a clean taking, and that I agree with the fact that the RFP should be put out first. I agree with the fact that we should know who the developer is going to be, and we have an agreement with them before we actually take possession of the property, which has been determined by the town attorney. However, I'm bothered by what is the dollar value they're going to be giving to anyone who is claiming rights to this property, and will we be seeing some kind of a purchase amount come forward in the future? Because once again, unless, I don't believe that the current people who believe they own it are willing to just give it to the town and walk away and are looking for no money. Somehow I just want to be clear that the town isn't clearing title so that an owner can prosper in dollar value when entering into agreement. Because if that's the case, I believe we might be setting precedents. And I know I'll be in the town hall on Thursday morning with about 7 deeds that I'd like to have cleared up. So anyhow, if I could have some kind of indication of the process of, once again, the dollar value that's going to be placed on this taking. If we take the land, we have to pay something for it. I mean, we just can't, unless the owners are going to give it to us for free.
The motion seeks to appropriate $1, Mr. Kukunis. So at this stage, that's all that's being considered by town meeting. I don't know if Mr. Giorgio wants to comment on that any further.
I don't think so, Mr.
Any further debate on the main motion? Mr. McCaskill?
Just to the previous speaker, so there is no confusion, we are going to go out with an RFP process. Right now, that we're asking town meeting to approve us working forward to historically preserve that building. And to the previous speaker, born in the RFP, whatever the value of that is going to be borne by the successful bidder of the RFP. The successful bidder of the RFP is going to have to come up with a dollar amount. The town is a partner, and what we're looking for is your permission to do a public-private partnership to preserve that Baptist church, to clean the title on the cemetery, to clean the title on the parking lot. And we ultimately, on the pump station question, we've addressed that. We got a piece across the street, and we'll look at that. But we're looking to get rid of another building in the town of Harwich that is looking at falling down around itself. And we're looking to add it back to the tax rolls, add some housing to it, and the town has the ability to do that. And anyone that does have 7 deeds, I would welcome them to come to town hall so we can figure out where those are and get those back on the tax rolls also. But we're looking to do a public-private partnership, not looking to make money and not looking to come back to you to spend money. We're asking for $1, and the RFP will show that the costs will be borne by the successful bidder of that RFP.
Further debate? Mr. Bell, did you have something further? And then I have Mr. McManus.
Yes, I just wanted to add something about the cost issue. First of all, there's the unknown legal costs that would be involved in doing title searches on, I believe they're upward of 7 or 9 separate slivers of land in that one parcel that go back to the 1750s or 1760s. I don't know what kind of speculator in real estate is willing to put 6 figures into legal research with an open-ended, uncertain future. So I think this is in benefit for the town to clarify and, again, restore to the tax rolls. Secondly, consider the costs that are going to be incurred by the purchaser, whoever that may be, and it's an open-ended scenario, but you've got a building that dates to 1810, the ceiling of which has fallen in. I have seen it. You're talking about debris that's chest deep inside. This is a major undertaking with a beneficent public face to it. So I think that the cost things have to be estimated and calculated at the time by the people who are going to do an RFP. Then finally and thirdly, this is good for the town. Imagine having between this and the schoolhouse 2 abutting lots that people just drive by. All of a sudden, we're going to have like 12.5 rent-paying individuals actually involved in reconstructing and breathing life back into a village that has been essentially moribund for a half a century. So again, I think this is exactly what the town should be doing, and I think it's a great thing. I hate to repeat myself, but I encourage you to vote for it. Thank you.
Mr. McManus?
Ed McManus. I guess my only question is, because this piece of property has the church and it has a parking lot and it also has a cemetery, in the rolling out of this, is it the intent of the town to transfer the cemetery to this private owner and have the cemetery go back on the tax rolls? I'm not sure what tax value a cemetery has.
Anybody want to respond to the future of the cemetery in this transaction?
I mean, it would make sense for me to have that put into the inventory of town-owned cemeteries.
Mr. Giorgio.
Mr. Moderator, I believe that the intent of the Select Board would be not to convey the cemetery to a private developer, but instead transfer it to the Cemetery Commission so that they can so the Commission can continue to maintain that cemetery. My understanding is that is one of the cemeteries that the Commission currently manages, and so the intent would be to formally transfer it to the Cemetery Commission.
Mr. Giorgio, when I worked for the Cemetery Commission 50 years ago, I mowed that cemetery, so the town has been maintaining it for a long period of time. Further debate on the motion?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Karen Horn, West Harwich. I am a little bit confused, kind of to follow up on Mr. Kokonis's point. We're looking at a $1 exchange for this property. If you exchange money, and my understanding is you have purchased it, so now the town, unless someone can explain how that isn't the case, so following that thinking, the town has paid $1 for this property. They now own it, even though we're being told, no, we do not own it. When the building is sold to a developer or whomever, fulfills the RFD, who will get that money? That is incredibly confusing to me, because if the town is going to take it by, quote, gift, purchase, eminent domain, or otherwise, when you take it, you now own it. But you're standing there saying the town will not own it, and I need an explanation, please.
Certainly. Mr. Giorgio.
And I apologize, this can be very confusing, but the intent here is that the town will not record that order of taking, which is the act where the town obtains ownership of that property. The town will not do that unless and until we've identified through an RFP process a developer, and we have negotiated both a purchase and sale agreement and a land development agreement with that developer. And when you say, we appropriate $1, that's really nominal consideration. We don't actually, write a check for $1 to anybody.
Okay, so to follow up on that, your intention is not to be owning it. So again, the question is just being ignored. We have asked people in town, we've asked people directly related to the church building, who is going to get the money from the developer when they purchase this property? Who are they purchasing it from, is my question. And for some reason, nobody is willing to answer this question in the whole town. I don't know why.
Mr. Giorgio, if you know, the question is, if a developer in their RFP proposes to pay money, to whom is that money going under the scenario as the town envisions it at this point?
So as I envision and by the way, I don't think I've spoken this much at a Harwich Town meeting in a long time. This is nice. No, seriously, it is envisioned that whoever is the successful proposer, and that could be the developer who has expressed an interest, they will have a separate agreement with the church to deal with who gets the money, how it's split up. That's not our concern. That's going to be a private matter between the developer and the owners and the current owners of the church. We would want anyone with a purchase and sale agreement on that property, as well as the record owners, to agree to protect the town from future liability.
Does that answer your question?
I personally feel like it's still skirting the question. So I'll rephrase it. I'm just trying to understand. So
Look, town meeting is not for the purpose of cross-examination.
I understand. So from the time you, quote, take the property to do the RFP, is there no owner at that point? Because if you've taken it from First Baptist Church, who owns it, I think, and the town is now doing the RFP process, is there no owner during that interim period?
The town's not going to own it during the RFP. That's what Mr. Giorgio has said. The only way the town can own it is by recording at the registry an order of taking. It's not going to happen. That's what he's told the body.
So it's kind of just...
Whoever owns it now will own it during this entire process. Whoever owns it.
Okay, so the town is doing an RFP sort of on behalf of the current owner?
No.
I don't think he said that. Mr. Giorgio?
No, the town is going to do an RFP to identify a potential purchaser of that property.
Okay.
All of that's going to take place while the church currently owns that property, will continue to own that property. If we get a proposal, if we can work out the details, then and only then will the town assume ownership by recording an order of taking.
Okay, thank you.
Further debate. I know this is complicated, so let's make sure we get all the questions on the floor before we take a vote. Mr. Howell, did you want to say something? Then I've got you over next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to take this discussion in a slightly different direction. There were a lot of people who worked a long time on the Captain's Row. Duncan is right. I mean, it was a neglected area. The look of failure is on the face of Bishop's Terrace. That's what failure looks like. We're trying to do something creative here. If you want to save these buildings, there needs to be capital involved in it. The whole concept of the DCPC was to save the exteriors, but to open up the prospect of some economic activity which would allow the place to start to prosper again. If we could reintroduce into the area a bunch of new residents who will arguably be able to buy things in the area and create capital, there might be future investment on parts of other people. But this, unless we can clear this situation up, that church is going to just fall into itself. It's been going in that direction for more than 20 years. And there needs to be a little leap of faith in here. There is a certain amount of this that's emotional. Unless you don't want to see the Captain's Row succeed, you need to support something that's a little creative like that. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to partner with private parties in order to do something. An RFP is going to be put out. It'll all be on the up and up because whoever it is that winds up bidding the best deal to the town is the one that's going to wind up with the deal. But the real deal is going to be the town is going to benefit.
Further debate. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, I think this is wonderful, what is trying to occur, so I am in support of that. But there's a legal component to this, and this article does say to acquire. Acquire means purchase. Now, I understand it's not going to be recorded until whenever. I was a real estate broker in Rhode Island and Massachusetts for 20 years. When you write a contract to purchase, the person that's buying it, they actually have ownership, partial ownership in that property, and it is perfected when it's recorded. I think there might be a law that you have to record the transfer of property within a certain time frame, but I'm not a lawyer. This is a great idea, but there just seems to be some underlying legal questions as to how appropriate this process is. So I approve of the project, but there just seems to be some pieces missing in the process.
So one thing I'd suggest to you that may help in the first line, to see if the town will vote to authorize. All this vote does is authorize the Board of Selectmen to take those actions. Nothing gets done. Selectmen don't have to do any of that. Town meeting authorizes something, they don't have to go forward. There is no property interest by voting to authorize them to start this process.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further debate? Mr. Kukunis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The town attorney raised an interesting, got my ears up a little bit. He said that the present owners or perceived owners, because of the title situation, are going to be entering into an agreement to purchase the property with the developer. So that tells me then that the town is not going to actually be ever owning this property, that we're clearing the title, and the perceived present owners are going to benefit from the sale of that property, whatever, and I'm going to go back to my $300,000 scenario. Developer comes in, meets all the criteria in the RFP that the town puts out, offers $300,000 in cash for it. According to town attorney, that $300,000 is going to go to the church, and the town is going to receive maybe title to the cemetery and a easement, if you will, for the prospective sewer. And because of the RFP, we'll have historic preservations put on it, which, by the way, the building already has on. You know, we don't need to do that. I mean, it's in Captain's Row. It already has developed. Anybody who buys that building needs to follow historic preservations already. So that part of this RFP doesn't secure me. Again, I'm still concerned with the process. I understand the town is going to proceed with an RFP without owning the property. I'm assuming that that RFP will say, once we pick a developer, the town is going to then register their deed, attain ownership of it, and that same afternoon, register the deed for the new owner or the new developer who is going to do the actual construction of the unit. If that's not the way it's happening, can someone at least explain to me how it's happening then? Because are we selling, the church is going to make a deal with a developer, get paid the $300,000? The town is out some money. We're the ones that did the title research. We're the ones that did all the filings and attorney's fees. Might be 30 or 40 grand, but it's not a buck. It's something. Or is the RFP going to say, all right, we're going to assess this property at 150, pay the owner 150 from the proceeds of the 300, and then keep the 150 for ourselves to make back our money that we had to expend to clear the title. Because, there is an expense to this. So someone's got to explain to me how we're moving forward with this, because it's not typical Chapter 30B.
Anyone want to respond to Mr. Kunis's, Mr. McCaskill?
I would agree that it's not typical. The Board of Selectmen's meetings and conversations on this so far, in the RFP, the respondents will be required to do all title work, all the costs. The Town of Harwich, we are not asking you for anything other than $1 to save this building from falling in around itself. So in the RFP, we are going to, whoever bids on that RFP is going to be paying for the title work. If the title work and appraisal, for that matter, and if the appraisal comes in that it's worth $300,000 and that the owner's unknown, all of that money will have to be escrowed, and the owner of the church is not going to be walking away with the check with the developer. As mentioned previously, this is a public-private partnership that we're contemplating. At no cost to the town of Harwich and the residents to save that church and to add some housing and to continue the dream of Captain's Row. But in the RFP, whoever responds to it will be required to do the title work and bear all costs.
Any further debate? I know it's a complicated question. Any other questions before we go to a vote? Looks like you're ready for a vote. Because the motion contemplates the use of eminent domain authority, it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. I'm going to read the motion that's before you before I take the vote. It's that Article 2 be accepted and adopted, and the sum of $1 be raised and appropriated for this purpose, and, under the amendment, that a perpetual historic preservation restriction be placed on the exterior of the West Harwich Baptist Church that meets the criteria under General Laws, Chapter 184, Sections 31, 32, and 33. All those in favor of the motion as read, so signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by saying no. I rule that it got the necessary 2/3 majority and passed. We'll move on to Article 3. See if the town will vote to raise and appropriate a transfer from available funds a sufficient sum of money to support a comprehensive review of the town's current code, which is comprised of the Harwich Charter, general bylaws, and zoning bylaws, and to act fully thereon. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd ask you to pay a little bit of attention. I'm going to make a motion that changes some of the wording in the article. Not very difficult, but it is a clarification. I move that Article 3 be accepted and adopted by deleting the words, and I quote, "and zoning bylaws" on line 3, and the word, and I quote, "of" on line 2, and adding the words, and I quote, "restricted to" on the second line prior to the words, and I quote, "the town's current code," and that the sum of $75,000 be raised and appropriated for the purposes of this article.
Okay, so the motions are made and seconded to accept and adopt, but a couple of changes, deleting, most important of which is deleting the reference to zoning bylaws on line 3, and adding words that it's restricted on the second line. So to make it very clear that this expenditure is for a review of the Harwich Charter and the general bylaws and not the zoning bylaws. Any debate on the main motion? Looks like you're ready for a vote. All those in favor of the motion as read, so signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by saying no. It is a vote. Article 4. See if the town will vote to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, or borrow a sufficient sum of money to secure the services of an owner's project manager, OPM, for the ongoing construction work at Brooks Academy Museum and to act fully thereon. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that Article 4 be accepted and adopted, and the sum of $150,000 be raised and appropriated for the purposes of the article.
Motion under Article 4 is accept and adopt. The sum is $150,000, and it's proposed to be raised and appropriated. Is there any debate? Yes, sir.
I think I may have missed a meeting, because the last time I recall the Brooks Academy Museum was awarded $1 million in order to replace a basement, and I think I've missed, because this says $1.5 million, so I may have missed a meeting. Can somebody educate me about when this happened?
Anybody want to speak to that? Mr. Powers, Town Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Powers, Town Administrator, and town voter from North Harwich. The purpose of this article is to correct an omission at the annual town meeting. The original request under the annual town meeting was $250,000 for the purpose of an owner's project manager related to the Brooks Academy Museum project, which is ongoing. The project is not simply related to the basement. The bulk of the project and the need for the owner's project manager is related to the lifting of the foundation and the building itself to account for the foundation reset work, for lack of a better phrase, which will accommodate work in the basement. The whole purpose of this article, though, is for the town to rely upon a subject matter expert as owner's project manager to make sure that the contractor, and we are thrilled to announce that we have a contractor under bid, despite our first time trying to get bids in the current marketplace. So the $1.5 million is the total dollar amount that we contemplate will be put into bear on the Brooks Academy project thus far and going forward. However, the vast majority of that is related to the $1.185 million project that is the lift of the building. So that is the primary purpose of the owner's project manager.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
This is what I'm missing. The $1 million I'm sorry, that I may have missed the meeting that this happened on. I remember being outside Monomoy High School. We were on the lawn, and we approved $1 million for the basement at that time. And we were assured that there was a cushion, that this was more than what was needed for the basement. So there's something that has happened in the interim. The project escalated in its cost. This is $1.5 million, and it's primarily to lift the building to accommodate the basement, correct?
No, this article is $150,000 for an owner's project manager, which is a separate procurement outside of the construction project itself.
And the construction project of 1.5 has been approved at a meeting that I missed.
The construction project that the OPM is going to be related to went out to bid, and it is $1.185 million. And if the reference is to the outdoor football field, we had two of them. I believe there were articles that impacted upon this project at the September 28th, 2020 town meeting, as well as the May 2021 annual town meeting. So the funding for the project has already been afforded to the town.
And what is that total, Mr. Powers? Just, I think that's what he's after.
Yeah.
If I could rely upon a member in the audience who took his cue, the chair of the Brooks Academy Museum Commission, Mr. Moderator.
Yes.
Hi, David Spitz.
I
Chair-
thought you looked familiar, Mr. Spitz.
Chair
Good
of the-
evening.
Chair of the Brooks Academy Museum Commission. There's zero change to what was approved by town meeting a year and a half ago. This is exactly the same project. The project at that time and now consisted of lifting the building, repairing the foundation so that the building will not continue to slowly, thankfully, crumble. 150 years ago, the building was built on nice, round Cape Cod stone, which over time doesn't do so well. So we need this. We talked about the historic church. Now we've got a historic town building that needs to be saved. And this project, a year and a half ago and now, with no changes in between, is intended to do that. While we are lifting the basement, a portion of it has a crawl space and no basement. This is not a basement project. It is a repair the foundation project. We are taking advantage, as we put forward with no changes a year and a half ago, to dig out additional basement space to do that, along with the more important part, which is the fixing the foundation. All of that comes to, was it 1.1, 1.2 million? I don't have the number in front of me. We did think that we had a lot of cushion at the time. This was originally estimated at approximately $750,000 or $800,000. The town engineer, when we were fortunate enough to have one, added 20% design contingencies, 25% construction contingencies. When we were funded by CPC, we included those 20% plus 25% contingencies. And guess what? COVID and supply chain issues have used up all of that. Oh. We have seen project after project throughout the state not go forward because the bids were too high. Our 1.1 or 2, I still am remembering incorrectly, the sole bid in the spring came in at 1.7 million. We rebid after talking with many contractors as to when the better time of year to bid would be, and we were told August, September. We went out to bid in August. We got 4 bids this time. I congratulate our architects for pounding the pavement and getting those bids. He had someone who did the low bid in pardon me for going on a bit long.
Yeah, the gentleman's question was, how much have we appropriated for this project? That was his question.
Okay, I'm going to finish.
Okay.
I think I'm under my 10 minutes. That contractor who bid on the Boston area project, who was low bidder elsewhere, he bid on ours at $2.4 million. We had 4 bids this time, ranging from 1.2 to 2.4 million. Fortunately for us, the 1.2 million, which is what we are going forward with, fits in with our budget barely. And to make all this work so that costs don't come in higher as we go through construction, we would dearly like this group tonight to approve the OPM cost.
Okay, so it sounds like, sir, that the is $1.2 million was the appropriation, and this $150,000 is separate.
I understand, and thank you for the explanation, because I didn't understand, how did it get from 1 million to an escalated amount? So
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. Any further debate? Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. If I could just help that gentleman out just a little bit more before he goes away and sits down. One more thing. When the Finance Committee looked at this initially, we had the same question, because the threshold for having an owner's project manager from this, by the state, a requirement, is $1.5 million project. And so we took the numbers we had before us and also looked at the capital plan as it exists, and additional items that will be going into this as we go forward gets you significantly above the $1.5 million, which in our mind then said, okay, we really do need a project manager for this project.
Further debate on the motion? Yes, ma'am.
Sharon Foster, just a comment. If this is a requirement, according to the Commonwealth's procurement laws, when the cost for this project went up to 1.5, this should have been automatic. So someone needs to be paying attention that as we're making changes to our projects, that we're following the law and that's incorporated in the total amount we're approving, so that we're not getting surprised like this later on and having to vote for additional funds. This should have been in the original 1.5 million that was already approved. So it's not a question, it's more of a comment that we're not nickel and dime moving forward because people aren't paying attention as projects change. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further debate? Mr. McManus.
Yes. I was the chair of the Monterey Regional High School Building Committee, and we had a very good owner's project manager there that over the course of the construction saved us more than the cost of providing those services. I think in a project as complex as this is going to be, with an old structure that's going to be lifted, a variety of historic preservation issues to take into account, that even if it was only going to cost us $1 million and didn't hit that threshold, we would be well served in having an owner's project manager who specializes in these types of projects, looking after our interests and catching and saving us the different pots of money along the way through construction. And I urge town meeting to vote to approve this.
Any further debate on the motion under Article 4, which is accept and adopt, and the sum of $150,000 be raised and appropriated? Any further debate? Hearing none, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as read so signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by saying no. It is a vote. Article 5. See if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds a sufficient sum of money to be added to the fiscal year 2022 operating budget of several departments to fund new contractual agreements between the town and the Management Employees Association, SEIU Local 888, and act fully thereon. Mr. Hughes.
I move that Article 5 be accepted and adopted, and the sum of $22,916.72 be raised and appropriated for the purposes of the article.
Motion under Article 5 is accept and adopt. The sum is $22,916.72, and it's proposed to be raised and appropriated. Is there any debate? Mrs. Foster.
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted clarification on what these funds are for and for whom.
Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would point out that the request here is relative to the last fiscal year, and that's because the group that's identified there, which is our management union, is the shorthand. The longhand is the SEIU Local 888. As we talked about at the annual town meeting, we had a number of the collective bargaining groups that we were in constant and active negotiation with. At the time that we were negotiating with SEIU, they were under an agreement that had expired at the end of fiscal year 2021. So the town was able to successfully negotiate a one-year agreement. This funds that one-year agreement, and then at the same time engage in a successful negotiation for a three-year agreement. The three-year agreement was already funded on the operating budget for fiscal year 23. So this step is necessary to honor the contract for that 1 year.
Further debate? Hearing none, I'm going to put to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as read so signify by saying aye. And those opposed by saying no. It's a unanimous vote, and I so declare it. Article 6. To see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds a sufficient sum of money to fund salary and wages for the position of surveyor for fiscal year 2023, including office-related expense, and to act fully thereon. Mr. Hughes.
I move that Article 6 be accepted and adopted, and that $65,000 be raised and appropriated for the purpose of the article.
Motion under Article 6 is accept and adopt. The sum is $65,000. It's proposed to be raised and appropriated. Is there any debate? Ms. Sabula.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Linda Sabula. I just have a question. We've spent about $200,000 in the last hour and a half. Where's that coming from? How much free cash was available? Because I don't recall hearing anybody say where the funds are coming from.
The funds in every motion have been raised and appropriated. Tax levy.
Tax levy. So we're going to be taxed more? Or is this free cash? Where is this coming from?
Mr.
How are
Powers.
we funding this?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As the moderator said, it's raise and appropriate with every article. We did that because free cash is in the process of being certified, but was not certified before tonight's meeting. But wait, there's more. If we go through this article, we have two articles coming up after that replenish the general fund, and as the moderator said earlier this evening, would offer relief to the taxpayers. So once we're done with Articles 1 through 6, we'll be able to articulate under Articles 7 and 8 the net positive relief for the taxpayers.
So, Linda, we haven't used any free cash tonight. Nothing's been funded with free cash.
Okay, but just to be clear, what I just heard is we're spending money hoping that Articles 7 and 8 pass to get the money back. So we're spending in advance. I just want to be clear on that. That is correct?
All of the articles are raised and appropriate. So they've all been on the tax levy up to this point.
Not answering the question, but thank you.
So any further debate on the motion under Article 6? Looks like you're ready for a vote. And again, it is, oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Foster.
Last time you'll hear from me tonight.
That's okay.
My question is, since the retirement in 2019, we've been doing survey work, I assume, so I'm just wondering, what have we expended paying outside people on a yearly basis to have this work done, or has it not been happening at all? So is it better to continue contracting out this work, or will we see a savings by paying someone $65,000 and having them on the staff? Thank you.
Mr. Powers.
The short answer is it's the town's obligation to fund the position that is presently in the association that you see referenced in the warrant. Meaning, yes, the town years ago did not fill the position when it became vacant due to retirement. But the town has an obligation under labor laws to fill that position, and the town did not seek funding for it. So that's point number one. Point number two is the town, and yes, we have been relying upon vendor contracts to do surveying. Point number 2 is the town has not been able to fill the town engineer position. And those two positions, as others might be able to say better than I, have always been together in the town. As it turned out, I believe in 2018 and 19, both the town engineer position and the surveyor position were vacated by retirements. Past administrations made the effort to hire an engineer and do survey work by contract. Now that we're looking for a town engineer, we need a town engineer to rely upon a town surveyor. So first, I would argue there's somewhat of a moral obligation of the town through administration and management to honor the position that should be funded. And then secondly, it should bear fruit for us by being able to find a caliber engineer who can rely upon day in and day out surveying service. But the intent of this is to correct something that quite frankly probably should not have gone on in the first place.
Any further debate? Looks like you're ready for a vote. The motion under Article 6 is accept and adopt. The sum is $65,000 and it's proposed to be raised and appropriated. All those in favor of the motion as read so signify by saying aye. And those opposed by saying no. The motion carries. Article 7. See if the town will vote to amend the action taken under Article 6 of the 2022 annual town meeting by adjusting the amount to be raised and appropriated to pay for the Monomoy Regional School District revised assessment for fiscal year 2023 and to act fully thereon. Mr. Hughes.
I move that Article 7 be accepted and adopted, and that the amount to be raised and appropriated for the purposes of this article shall be reduced by the sum of $739,747 from $28,041,205 to $301,000 and $458. You get that?
What there?
$27,301,458.
So the motion under Article 7 is to reduce the assessment that we made at the annual meeting for the Monomoy Regional School District, and we're reducing it, if this article is acted on favorably, by $739,747. Is there any debate? Hearing none, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as read so signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by saying no. It's a unanimous vote, and I so declare it. Article 8. See if the town will vote to amend the action taken under Article 7 of the 2022 annual town meeting by adjusting the amount to be raised and appropriated to pay for Cape Cod Regional School District, revised assessment for fiscal year 2023. Mr. Hughes.
I move that Article 8 be accepted and adopted, and that the amount be raised and appropriated for the purposes of this article shall be reduced by the sum of $183,394 from $2,079,314 to $1,895,921.
Motion under Article 8 is to reduce the assessment that we made at the annual meeting for Cape Cod Regional Technical School District by $183,394. Debate. Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First, specifically to Article 8, wherein as we expected the Monomoy, or anticipated the Monomoy change based on the results of the two towns voting on the assessment, we were not aware of the revised assessment by Cape Cod Tech. We were made aware of that in June, so that is a further benefit to the town. As mentioned earlier, by virtue of the votes that have occurred this evening, I'm going to try and say it correctly and look down for the finance folks. The net effect on our operating budget, our general fund to be raised and appropriated, is a relief of $505,223.28. And I said earlier, but wait, there's more. It was the intention of this Board of Selectmen to return as much back to the taxpayers as possible. Given that we did not have some free cash available to rely upon as we may normally have done in other years, the board has already directed me to create an article with council that will come before you in the spring to create further relief that will impact upon the fiscal year 24 tax rate. So what I've just mentioned this evening provides relief on the tax rate to be set later this fiscal year, hopefully before the end of the calendar year, but there is an effort by the Board of Selectmen to continue to provide relief by recognizing another article in the spring.
Something tells me we won't have any trouble with a quorum at that meeting either. Okay, so any further debate on the motion under Article 8? Hearing none, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as read, so signify by saying aye. And those opposed by saying no. It's a unanimous vote, and I so declare it. I'll now entertain a motion, Mr. Hughes, to adjourn the special town meeting.
So moved, Mr. Moderator.
It's been moved and second to adjourn the special town meeting. All those in favor so signify by saying aye. And those opposed by saying no. Meeting's adjourned. All those opposed may remain.